30 high-profile accounts promoting a Bitcoin scam that encouraged users to send over cryptocurrency. So in this special live Blockchain Insider show, we're going to dive into what we know about the event so far, what it means in terms of regulation and security, and the broader implications for Twitter, Bitcoin, and the concept of cryptocurrencies itself. To start, I'm just going to give a bit of background as to what we know so far, and then we're going to be joined by an exceptional panel to pull through this. So the first account hijacking happened at around 7 p.m. BST in the UK on the 15th of July, when one of BitMEX's leading traders posted a tweet that asked users to join his paid private trading group. It quickly became clear that the account was not controlled by the person behind it. Although the tweet itself got quickly deleted, the impersonator was still able to fool some people into sending some Bitcoin. The second takeover took place almost an hour later when Binance's account tweeted that the company had partnered with Crypto for Health to reward community members with BTC. The attached link led to the second Bitcoin address, which was then used for the majority of the other tweets. In the next hour, 10 other cryptocurrency influencers and companies, including Ripple, were targeted with similar messaging, encouraging followers to part with their Bitcoin. After Ripple, the hacker moved on and targeted accounts associated with cryptocurrency and started gaining access to mainstream accounts, including those owned by major figures and politicians. Elon Musk, who is followed by 37 million people, was the first mainstream target, followed by Bill Gates, Uber, Apple, Kanye West, Jeff Bezos, Mike Bloomberg, and many, many, many more. The last celebrity targeted in the scam before Twitter acted was Kim Kardashian, perhaps fittingly, whose account tweeted the third unique Bitcoin address. To date, around 12 Bitcoin worth more than $100,000 has been sent. Okay, that's enough about the facts. We want to speak to some of the real brightest blockchain minds out there to see what do they think about this whole situation and how could this change the world of crypto in the future? First up, joining us today, we have Noelle Acheson, who is Director of Research over at CoinDesk. Noelle, how are you doing? Really, really well, thank you. We can't see you on the screen just yet, so you're a voice from afar, but we'll get you involved in just a second when the software catches up. We've also got Dr. Tom Robinson, who's co-founder and CTO at Elliptic. Tom, thanks for joining us. Also a voice from afar, Tom, we'll get you up in just a second. And we've got Jakub, I don't know how to say your last name, co-founder and chief technology officer at Coinfirm. Great to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. So as you can see now on the screen, we have Noelle from CoinDesk, Dr. Tom Robinson from Elliptic, and of course Jakub from Coinfirm. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me. Noelle, I'm going to come to you first because well, you have some experience over at CoinDesk. CoinDesk was actually targeted. So what was your first exposure to what happened?
It was totally epic. Just following it on the internal Slack channels, which are always a great source of entertainment, even when things aren't getting heated like they were. One of my colleagues posted in the news channel, Binance has been hacked, and it was the first that we were aware of it. And it was like, oh God, that's important. We should write about that. And then someone else chimed in, I think CZ as well. Okay, well, add that to the article. Coinbase as well. Great. We'll add that to this article. And then someone posted a screenshot of a CoinDesk tweet saying that we were supporting Crypto for Health. For every Bitcoin you send to Crypto for Health, we'll send you two back, kind of thing. And the general reaction was, it was obviously something bigger than we expected. Mercifully, I have very quick-witted colleagues who managed to get that tweet deleted before we lost control of the account, which was pretty soon afterwards. And then the entire company was just chiming in on this one news channel with news from around the web and escalating the number of as the profiles are getting more important, the caps lock was being liberally sprinkled around the place. And it was so strange to be part of this very big thing that was happening, that was getting bigger by the second. And at one stage, we were all sort of looking at each other saying, there has to be more than this. There's no way they can hack this level of profiled account and just want Bitcoin. This is probably a diversion. What is really going on? You know, that sort of sinking feeling where you're just waiting for something bad to happen. You don't know what it's going to be. Mercifully, and I'm sure Tom and Jakub are going to give us more detail on, mercifully, it turns out it was just some rather inexperienced people playing, we think. but definitely a day that we will not forget. And I do know that many of my colleagues did not get any sleep that night.
I can only imagine, and like you say, the profile of some of the accounts that were targeted was really significant, which probably made this extremely newsworthy. Tom, when did you first notice that something had gone on, and what did the sort of the hours and day look like from your perspective?
So similar to Noelle, I think I first became aware of it on our internal messaging system when Binance and their CEO CZ started tweeting links to cryptoforhealth.com. And I think we realized immediately that this was, the account had been taken over and this was a scam, because we had seen many very similar scams on Twitter over the past few years, which have raised millions of dollars worth of crypto. So it's a very common type of scam. The difference here was that it was actually being done through genuine Twitter accounts. What we typically have seen in the past is that they are copycat Twitter accounts. So for example, if you look at Elon Musk's tweets in the comments below, you'll see responses from another account that looks like it's Elon Musk. But if you look at the Twitter handle, it's not. It's a different account. And they will tweet links to sites like this asking for crypto donations. So at first we thought that this was just a few individual accounts that had been compromised. They'd somehow managed to get a password reset or change a password. But then it became much more widespread, and it wasn't just a few isolated accounts. It was Elon Musk, it was Bill Gates, it was Apple, it was Uber. And a lot of the account holders were reporting that they had two-factor authentication enabled. And so at that point, we realized that probably this wasn't a few isolated accounts that had been compromised. It was probably Twitter itself that had been compromised.
Which is a powerful insight, Tom, isn't it? That Twitter itself could have been compromised. You mentioned two-factor authentication. For the unfamiliar, do you just want to remind everybody what that is?
Absolutely. So this is an additional way to secure an online account beyond just a username and password. It uses something you have, like a mobile phone, such that you can prove that you are the genuine holder of the account. So it might involve receiving an SMS to your phone or using an app like Google Authenticator on your phone to provide a code that you can enter into the online account to show that it's really you.
Fantastic, Tom. Thank you for that. Jakub, I want to pick up with yourself because you obviously saw this stuff happening too at the same time, and Tom makes an interesting point. It appears to be Twitter that's hacked, not just the underlying accounts. Do you think the same thing? Did you see it evolving, and what did your story look like as you were going through this?
So we obviously see it evolving, and we were closely looking on how this evolves and what's going on. It started for us from the Binance tweet and later the CZ. I remember that we had internal discussion in our team that it is a diversion, or there is something more around this, similar as Noel mentioned, because the amount which was actually stolen or raised, we can say, was so insignificant compared to other hacks of similar type that we see this as either a community is extremely aware of such thing going on, or there is something more into it. Happily, it turned out that based on the information we have and other investigatory journalists writing around the topic, we had as a community more luck than preparation, actually, because if more advanced group will get such access, maybe not the Third World War, which is also the possibility, but millions of dollars could get extorted throughout multiple channels. Like we can say about endorsing given public trade companies. We could talk about playing for short leverage on publicly traded companies. So all these different scenarios that could be pulled happily didn't happen. And I think it's a big lesson for Twitter and the social media community itself.
I think that's a really good point, Jakub, because the reality here, Noelle, appears to be that somebody got keys to the kingdom of Twitter, could have done untold damage, and appears to have gone for a short joyride. And the interesting thing about choosing a Bitcoin scam in particular is, Noelle, there are companies like Elliptic, like Coinfirm, that are able to do what we call blockchain forensics or crypto forensics. Do you want to just set up what that is in layman's terms, and why these companies, sort of why it looks a little bit different when it's crypto to any other type of activity?
This is one of the most beautiful things about the crypto asset sector, is that the industry, is that we can see these kind of details in real time. Anyone has access to the blockchain. If you know how to read it, you can get an enormous amount of information. It was a question of hours before they were constructing profiles of these people. Where have they been before, and what are they doing with the money? The money is still, the Bitcoin is still being followed. When you try to explain this to traditional investors, that there's this rich trove of information available to anyone, it blows their mind. It really does. And with this hack, we are starting to see some of the massive advantages for law enforcement that Bitcoin is used for these things. With cash, the trail goes dead pretty fast and can be faked more easily than a crypto trail can be faked.
Jakub, I think you were going to follow in there. I mean, the nature of what you guys do is you can follow things in real time, as Noelle said. Jakub, were you able to do that? Were you following this in real time?
Yes, so we are obviously following the funds, probably similar to other blockchain forensic companies. There are different approaches, different algorithms. We are start seeing some patterns, and we closely cooperate with investigative agencies around the world to provide the best data, the most useful data for them as we can. But good point, Noelle said that with crypto, there is not a lot of privacy currently. It's obviously more global, and you can get easier access, but the data will be there for the decades probably. So if you do a transaction in cash today, tomorrow there is no trace of it. If you do this exactly the same transaction in crypto, you can get back to this information years later.
Jakub, that's a really good point. You've got this permanent record of everything that's ever happened in crypto, and yet these scammers appear to use that mechanism. Tom, talk to me about what the rationale for using something like Bitcoin is. Are there advantages to a scammer, and sort of what happens next? I mean, you were probably watching along live as well.
Yeah, so I think the big advantage of using something like Bitcoin in a scam like this is that Bitcoin transactions are censorship resistant. So there's nothing anybody can do to block these transactions or block the accounts that these transactions are going to. If they had put their PayPal address on these tweets instead, then PayPal would have just instantly closed that account. So when this happened, I mean, so our customers are primarily crypto exchanges who use our software for anti-money laundering purposes. And so we dropped everything to make sure we were helping them, because they have two things they want to do in a scenario such as this. So first of all, they want to make sure that their customers aren't falling victim to this scam and sending funds to these scam addresses. And secondly, the scammers are probably trying to cash out almost immediately. And so they want to make sure that the scammers aren't trying to cash out through their exchange. And so they use our software to screen transactions and make sure neither of those things are happening.
I think that's a really good point that you make, Tom, that the nature of the game has changed, and prevention is often better than the cure in this world. Noelle, you alluded to a mindset shift, I think, coming for the world of finance. And as you know, with my other hat on, Global Digital Finance has worked with FATF and a lot of other kind of agencies to produce standards for the InterVASP working group and the InterVASP messaging standard. There are things to share information around crypto exchanges that are starting to emerge, Noelle. But what do you think can be done or should be done next in the finance space, or was this more of a Twitter issue?
I believe it was more of a Twitter issue. I don't know if you've noticed, but the attention that has been, the focus from Washington in the aftermath of this hack has not been on crypto. It's been on Twitter. It's been on the vulnerability of centralized platforms like this. Have you heard any of the senators or congressmen talking about banning crypto, which you would expect after something this big? And you would expect it after so many headlines referring to Bitcoin scam. But I haven't seen anything like that. We are sensing an increased focus on the vulnerability of centralized platforms like this, which those of us who work in the sector have been talking about for quite some time. So I think that is where the main change will come, the re-architecting, perhaps, of platforms which we, for bad and for worse and for good, depend on to get our information. And I think, as Tom and Jakub have alluded to, when you think what this access could have done, it could have started war in the Middle East. Netanyahu's account was hacked. It could have created havoc in the markets if Biden or Apple had tweeted something that set the alarm bells ringing. And the fact that it was just Bitcoin and just $120,000 worth, we escaped, we dodged a bullet there.
Indeed, Noelle, I heard a few people describe this as the best hack followed by the worst scam. And Jakub, you were sort of alluding to that point. As Noelle says, if you were to take over Apple's account or other big company here, Jeff Bezos, Amazon's, you could announce all kinds of losses. You could the damage you could do would have been untold. But I'm really interested in your perspective, Jakub, on what Twitter can and could do and where the lens has fallen. Do you agree with Noelle that the lens has fallen more on Twitter?
Yeah, I totally agree. When we were experiencing that hack and looking into this, the single thing I was looking into is if current president of the United States will also get hacked. This would mean that the company social media platform became a vulnerable tool even for governments. It's their open problem that they can put words into mouths of the government, of the president, etc. So I think that Twitter will have pretty hard time explaining why they allowed this, why the internal personnel had access to this high-level accounts. They had few investigations going on them in the United States, similar as Facebook, similarly as other social media platforms. And I think this will only get more important topic especially for US, but for Europe as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of antitrust stuff coming at those platforms at the moment, isn't there, Tom? And I guess there's a question here that one of the viewers has asked, Sushant Tenaja, sorry, Sujan. Can the type of analytics that you're using apply if the scam would have been done in a privacy coin like Monero, or is it only for Bitcoin that something like this could work? And I think sort of pivoting that back towards Twitter as well, sort of as a privacy coin question. The second question then is, can there be anything that Twitter can do working with platforms like yourselves to sort of do some of the forensic work that follows up?
Yeah, that's a good question, because if the scammers had used something like Monero, it would have been practically impossible to follow the funds and see where they are today. The reason they probably didn't use Monero is that they wanted to raise a significant amount of money. And Bitcoin is the most widely held and accessible cryptocurrency out there. If they'd asked for Monero, I think they would probably have received far fewer payments to the addresses. So they need to balance anonymity with actually making some money out of this. In terms of how Twitter could use our capabilities, I think they have taken the approach of just banning people from posting addresses in tweets. I guess one alternative approach they could take is to screen the addresses that are being tweeted and decide which ones are safe to be shown to the public. And also going back to your previous point, which I think is very interesting, that this was a very sophisticated exploit followed by a very unsophisticated monetization of that exploit. We've seen this in the past with something like the WannaCry ransomware. That was based around an incredibly powerful exploit that managed to infect malware on tens of thousands of computers all around the world. And yet they only received about $100,000 in ransom payments. The exploit was incredibly sophisticated. Again, the monetization was pretty amateur.
Indeed. Tom, there's some points that sort of we've been alluding to there as well around the centralized platform. And Noelle, you kind of mentioned this as we were talking about the power of that centralized platform. And I think Jakub even alluded to it. But Noelle, reflect for me on what Twitter can reasonably do to combat misinformation, and can it combat misinformation when there is this risk of attack, and how does it start to gain confidence? And do you think that spreading misinformation could have been part of the motivation here?
This is a very good question, which dives down into the whole thorny question of decentralization. How much authority should any one platform have? And I'm not talking about access here. I'm actually talking about who should control what is considered good information or not. We all hear a lot about fake news. We all hear a lot about the damage that misinformation can do, as we have seen with this hack. But where's the line and who draws it? And if we are going to urge Twitter and others to move towards a more decentralized governance, if you like, then does that make controlling the fake news harder because there isn't as much control over the message? Then again, these are private platforms. What's wrong with controlling the message if you're a private platform? If you're considered a utility, that's a different thing entirely, but that requires a different type of regulation. These are all very thorny questions that this hack is starting to unravel, and I think this is what the regulators are going to start to be focusing on.
Indeed, I can imagine. Tom, I think there's potential risk here that being verified on Twitter and using that to communicate is seen as less and less official, or the other way around is the risk that people see it as official when it is arguably so vulnerable. And do you think decentralization is a useful part of that conversation, or is that sort of a red herring? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so I guess decentralization would help avoid something like what happened to Twitter last week, in that there'd be no central entity that could be hacked, and multiple accounts couldn't be compromised in one fell swoop. Of course, it shifts the responsibility from that central organization to individual users. If somebody managed to get hold of Elon Musk's credentials, he wouldn't be able to go to Twitter and reset his password. That account could be compromised on an ongoing basis. So, of course, there are drawbacks to decentralization as well.
Easy fix, is it, Tom? Jakub, I want to come to you just briefly and sort of ask, what do you think the core failure might have been here if you were to speculate? Is it a controls thing? Is it an identification and verification thing? Was it? Where would, if you had to put money on it, where would you say that the issue was and the challenge was?
Sure, but let me back to the previous question slightly. I think that in the crypto world there is such saying, not your keys, not your money. I think we see a great example of this in this Twitter case. It was not your platform, not your followers. We can say so. Twitter started playing, I think, dangerous game with moderators and controlling the message a few years ago, which gave employees of Twitter access to these internal tools that allow to take over the accounts. So I think that at least some decentralization is a good way to go. Decentralization for the past 20 years gave us only a better competition, better tools, better security on most of the cases. So yeah, the decentralized world should be safer. But if we can go fully distributed, similar to cryptocurrencies, where there is no central authority whatsoever and no control whatsoever, I'm not sure we have technology. Maybe we have technology, but I'm not sure we are ready for that.
Interesting. Noelle, what are your thoughts on not your keys, not your followers?
There's so much to talk about here, and pulling on something that Tom said a couple of seconds ago, the whole decentralized and what Jakub was alluding to also, the distributed solution. We tend to do this as a species. We've always done this. We introduce new technologies to solve problems, and then these new technologies create other problems. If we start to think about what a totally decentralized form of communication could be, it sounds chaotic, it sounds possibly unpleasant if there's no way to mute people that we think are saying offensive things and potentially harmful things. And when it comes to controlling even our own identities, that's a whole new layer of vulnerability. What if we lose it? Who's going to give it back to us? There always has to be somebody that is a point of vulnerability. But this is the world that we've chosen to build with this interconnectivity that the internet has given us.
It's challenging times, isn't it, Tom? Because you've always got that balance between sort of usability and security, which is an age-old balance. Because if it's not your keys, not your followers, not your keys, not your money, what does that actually mean? Because managing private keys is not trivial.
No. So the concept is that, well, so what you see Bitcoin maximalists talk about a lot is that if you are holding your cryptocurrencies on an exchange or other kind of centralized service, then those funds are basically not yours. They're not under your control, and therefore that exchange could be hacked and you could lose your funds. If you hold the private keys yourselves on your phone or your laptop, then you're the only person who has access to them. But you can still be hacked. Those funds can still be stolen. It's just that you have the responsibility, not the exchange.
It's interesting that people also use the term be your own bank. But if you are your own bank, you have your own bank robbers. So you just move where the problem is. If the bank is centralized and the bank gets robbed, a lot of people lose out, but hopefully the bank is big enough to absorb those losses. If you get everything stolen and the bank robber comes to your house, then you've lost everything. And maybe then we need insurance or something along those lines, Tom.
Absolutely. And the bank can afford to invest huge amounts in security, which you cannot as an individual, because they can spread that cost over many account holders rather than you just having your own funds to look after.
Well, there is a worldview out there in which surely it's not beyond the wit of man to make operational security or OPSEC accessible to people. When we do have these devices in our pockets that have lots of data about them that can identify us in unique and interesting ways, there's a whole argument there for actually why isn't identity itself decentralized? Why isn't sort of the credentials about who I am more decentralized, and indeed not reliant on these centralized platforms to play that role?
Exactly, and that would also solve the problem of having so many different identities across so many different platforms, and comes down to what do we even mean by identity. But as we alluded to before, these solutions introduce other problems, other vulnerabilities, and I'm sure as Tom can attest, the criminals are ingenious. Any kind of solution we're going to come up with, they are going to find ways to hack it, and any kind of security solution designer, any kind of technology builder has to be several steps ahead of where the criminals are going to be. There is no ideal solution. And if we're going to depend on one solution, if we're going to depend on a self-sovereign identity, for instance, then that does add a different layer of vulnerability. Decentralization sounds great. It sounds fantastic. But the practice of it is a lot more complicated and nuanced than we realize.
To remind everybody watching that if you've got any questions for any of the guests, then please leave them in the comments and we'll try and get the guests to answer them for you. I think, Tom, you were jumping in there?
Yeah, it sounds like we're criticizing decentralization a lot. I would also point out that I think it's extremely valuable to also have sole control of your wealth. I just think I think about a distributed portfolio. Like I want my bank to hold some of my wealth. I want to control some of my wealth. I think it's great to have the option to have that diversification.
It's often the case with these things that it's neither either or, it's some balance of the two. But we do see this narrative war, Jakub, emerging, where there are people who want more free speech on the platforms, and there are people that want more censorship, and it's almost a barbell of opinions that seem to be forming, and I don't know if there's the messy middle sort of watching this debate play out and not wanting either thing to happen. But has crypto sort of been caught in that debate? Is it somewhere in that debate? Because there is certainly an element of the crypto community that pushes for more decentralization and maybe pushes for more quote unquote free speech and libertarian views in some sense.
Yeah. So before answer, I will add slightly to what Noelle said and this decentralization. I think as a society we moved for decentralization a long time ago, because having all the power in the single entity was our thing. We had monarchies throughout the Europe So we moved from the monarchy, or most of the countries moved, but we moved to the democracy, where there is much more, the responsibility of our nation, of our country, is much more spread throughout different government agencies, through the parliament, through the president, etc. So doing maybe similar thing on the social media and internet itself is a good way to go, because currently we have few monarchies like Twitter, like Google, that are ruling what we can see, what we cannot see, and if they made a bad decision, the whole society gets hurt, like in this case. And responding to the question, I think, in general, putting too much power in anything single is a wrong way, and cryptocurrencies get mixed up pretty much by accident in this case. I think obviously it was the easiest way to get the money, as Tom mentioned, and most convenient for the hackers. They present democratic values, I think, that are strong in most of the societies, and that I don't think this is the ideological case with the Twitter hack. This wasn't some democratic fighting army making a statement. It was poorly done hack that used the best tool they had in their toolbox.
Interesting perspective. There's another perspective that came in from one of the viewers. Sac D, I believe it is, or Sash D, says July 15th was in fact Twitter's 14th anniversary of launching. Does that change any perspective? Is there potential for any novelty there? Noelle, any thoughts on that?
Indeed, many. It, I think, was just simply a statement. I don't think there's any significance beyond that. But pulling on what Tom said earlier, the mix of decentralization and centralization, there are some things which would work better with decentralization and various fail-safes in there. But a platform like Twitter has its value from being centralized. If we start to break up Twitter because we think it's too powerful and we want to decentralize it into little groups, it's not going to be so useful. We as human beings, because we have free choice, we're going to go to the platform where everyone else is. We're going to go to the one that has the network effects. And the only way to avoid that is to control our behavior and our choices. And I think many of us, especially those in the crypto sector, aren't going to like that solution very much. So this pulls on, that well-known privacy paradox, where we say we want privacy and yet we continue to use Gmail and accept cookies. I think this is something very similar. We're going to be hearing a lot about decentralization of communication platforms, but the world that prevents that from happening will be very different, and we might not enjoy the result.
Interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess when we're talking about decentralization of social media platforms, we're also talking about free speech issues as well. Bitcoin is a decentralized payment system, so it allows censorship-resistant transfer of value. A distributed social media platform would allow censorship-resistant communication, and so we've seen platforms like Twitter start censoring tweets. I guess those who are subject to that censorship might well be highly motivated to shift to a decentralized version of Twitter.
There's so much to pull apart in this decentralized versus centralization piece. Noelle, I'm just going to come back to you briefly. We know Jack Dorsey has announced Blue Sky, which is a potential less centralized version of Twitter. We know Square Crypto exists, which of course Square is one of his other major businesses that he's CEO of, and Square sort of Cash is one of the main crypto wallets and Bitcoin wallets, and indeed, my understanding is it's the only one in the US that allows you to move Bitcoin to any Bitcoin address, not just within its own walled garden. Do you think Jack Dorsey's in sort of the eye of the storm of this one a little bit?
I do, but I think he's prepared for this. I mean, he has been one of the crypto sector's strongest advocates for a long time now. He is also coincidentally, or not so coincidentally perhaps, the founder of Twitter. And he has been preparing for a more decentralized Twitter. But Ken, what do we mean by decentralized Twitter? We want to go onto Twitter to hear the voices of the people that we respect, but we also, many of us, want to hear about other opinions as well. There's decentralized control of communication, and then there's decentralized security. This is something that Tom and Jakub have both alluded to. There are two very, very different things, and maybe that is where the innovations and the improvements can come from, decentralized security. And be fascinating to pull on the thread of where that could lead us if we do come up with a system to protect identities and access in a much more secure, distributed, but also economical way. And that does open up new applications for finance.
Jakub, what are your thoughts there? Is there something to be said for decentralized security versus the communications?
I think the centralized security will be heavily reliant on the personal tokens, people taking in control their security, their access. There is no other way. Either someone controls this for you, or you need to control this yourself. I think we are slightly growing into the sphere with how important mobile phones became, how important part of our lives they are, and how valuable not in hardware they are, but in the data and the access they provide to other systems. People started learning how to make them more secure, obviously with great helps of companies creating the phones, but we moved from the early 2000 phones where you had just PIN to multiple factor authentications, to biometric authentications, to encrypted storage, to all these small details that adapt to system that is finally more secure and gives people ability to create their own vaults where they store their private data, but in the future it might be the token to access, let's say, a Twitter, or to access their bank in the more decentralized way.
I think that's an important point, Jakub, isn't it? That what you see at the moment is the way most mobile phones work, the way Apple works, is a lot of your biometrics actually sit locally on your device. They're not sent remotely because then they can't be compromised. And a lot of the security happens on the device itself, which is further away. So we're seeing this start to happen already. But typically your data sits somewhere else. And what you're talking about is linking up that decentralized security to be the ability to access that data and using tokens to start to manage that. Tom, I'm interested in your perspectives here as you look at this. That we have seen non-custodial wallets and custodial wallets in the crypto space for quite some time. Are there realistic differences between the two, and are there pros and cons of both of those approaches, and how's that going to play out, do you think?
So I think that both types of wallets are thriving, and it really depends on who you are and what your particular use case is. We have the likes of, I guess, custodial wallets more closely fit the traditional model of custodianship. And so we've seen a number of traditional finance companies enter the market and offer purely custodial wallet services. And I think they do.
And those sorts of Robinhood, potentially, they're doing custodial. Yeah. So in other words, they're looking after the Bitcoin or the crypto on your behalf.
Absolutely. And also a lot of custodial crypto services for institutions. And I think particularly for institutions, they like the idea that a known, trusted third party is looking after their funds. And then we have the self-hosted crypto wallets, where you just download some software onto your computer or phone, or you use a web app like the blockchain.info wallet, and you use that to store your funds. But in that case, you hold the private keys, you have complete responsibility for the funds. As I said, I think both models are valid and people can use both, and it's great that people have the choice of both.
And I think I really liked your perspective, Tom, that people can and probably should look to use a bit of both and diversify their security model, which is always good practice generally, Tom.
And of course, we're taking a very sort of Western democracy-centric view of all of this. I mean, there are plenty of places in the world where people don't really have that choice. They either don't have the documentation required to open an account with a financial institution to store their wealth, or they live in a dictatorship where if they store their wealth with a financial institution, they're at risk of getting it seized or stolen, in which case Bitcoin provides a viable alternative.
Noelle, zooming back out from this, do you think this Twitter hack, as it were, will impact Bitcoin at all in terms of its perception? There is arguably, or questionably, a negative perception out there. I'm particularly pointing to a New York Magazine columnist, Josh Barrow, who tweeted that making cryptocurrency illegal would have prevented all of this. What do you think about that?
I think it's a totally bewildering tweet. I mean, apparently he has a good reputation as a very intelligent individual, but would making cash illegal stop crime? Making something illegal, I think, as anyone knows, does not stop it from existing or being used. And the more illegal it is, the harder it is to monitor and control. So that was actually bewildering. I do not think Bitcoin will come out of this badly at all. In fact, I think it will come out of this positively. I think the news cycle of Bitcoin scam in the headlines lasts a few days, like any news cycle does. There's always something else to get worked up about. We tend to forget about it. Bitcoin certainly has great mindshare recognition now among the mainstream audience, perhaps in the case associated with scams, but also through the questions that are coming up about independence, about privacy, about seizure resistance, etc., etc. And the fact that the regulators are not focusing on crypto at the moment, I think, is an incredibly positive signal, which transmits that they pretty much accept that it's here to stay. They're worried about other vulnerabilities now. They don't see this as one of the vulnerabilities of the financial system.
Indeed, and in recent weeks and months, we've seen a number of announcements, Tom, from a number of regulators. I think the New York DFS has looked at changing how its BIT license works. I think the FCA have issued quite a bit of guidance. What's your read on the regulators' perspective?
Yeah, so as Noelle said, I was pleasantly surprised by the reaction of politicians and the media when it came to the Twitter story. The focus really was on the compromise of Twitter rather than the use of Bitcoin. But having said that, I am still concerned about what this means for regulation of crypto businesses. There are certain regulators and certain politicians who are pushing for more onerous regulation of crypto businesses. And I think this just provides them with additional justification for that. So I am concerned.
Interesting question. Jakub, how about yourself? How do you think the regulators are responding to this, and what was your read?
I happily agree with Noelle, because what we seen throughout past few years is whenever there are crypto regulations, they're only proving legality of the Bitcoin and other crypto assets, and they are helping companies to properly work with that risk, because every asset have risk. You have much more scams with United States dollars than with Bitcoins, and no one is talking about delegalizing the dollar. But on the other hand, you have much more regulations regarding US dollars, which helps companies, helps banks, payment processors, etc., assess that risk and manage that risk, approaching properly certain processes. The KYC was the first step in crypto, especially around the crypto exchanges. Currently, we are in the discussion around the travel rule from the FATF. So the processes exist to manage that risk. We just need to give credibility to cryptocurrencies, treat them as other assets, and start managing that risk properly.
Indeed, Jakub. It may be worth just double-clicking on what the travel rule is, because I think that's not known to everybody, and it's quite an important thing.
Okay, so the travel rule is a recommendation from Financial Action Task Force. It's so-called travel rule. It's generally treating cryptocurrency similarly to other wire payments, where whenever two payment processors, or in this case, virtual asset service providers, these are exchanges, payment processor, or custodian wallets, transfer the funds between themselves on behalf of some user, they need to send information who was that user. So if I have an account on exchange A and I want to transfer the funds to exchange B, the exchange A will inform the exchange B that it's me and I'm and I'm informing them that I want to transfer this to my other account. This helps with using cryptocurrency exchanges as laundering machines and mixers, because most of the exchanges didn't have the tools or regulations to properly exchange such information. This gives them a framework where they can add additional agreements of data protection, obviously between them, etc., or exchange data inside the single jurisdiction to properly inform each other about certain risks and certain bad actors. And this goes back to what Tom said, that there are tools being created to exchange the information, and the more ecosystem will collaborate on that, the more secure and more robust system we'll have.
Indeed, that ecosystem collaboration is going to be so key, isn't it, to kind of making that happen? And there are standards emerging, Tom.
Yeah, so I mean, this touches on the issue of regulation of unhosted wallets. So one way of bypassing the travel rule in crypto is just send your funds to an unhosted wallet rather than to another institution, because then there is no need to send any of that travel rule information. So it's kind of a symptom of applying legacy financial regulations to a new peer-to-peer payment mechanism. I mean, when I said I'm concerned about a regulator crackdown, I'm concerned about regulators putting limits on the funds being sent to those unhosted wallets by regulated entities. So what that means is if I hold Bitcoin in a wallet outside of a service like an exchange, maybe there'll be limits put on how much I can interact with a regulated business. And to illustrate this, Libra, the Libra currency, when they first announced their initial white paper, they had unhosted wallets in there. Anybody can hold Libra independently of a service provider. In version 2 of the white paper, that was removed, no unhosted wallets. And that was, I think personally, due to pressure from regulators. And I think we might see the same pressure exerted on public cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin.
Interesting to see. Well, let's hope that that doesn't impact the security of the individual and privacy in the process. Noelle, we're up against it on time, but I wanted to ask a couple of quick questions before we sort of wrap. First of all, yes or no, do you think this is going to be good for Bitcoin?
Yes, I do.
Yes, definitely so.
Maybe.
Okay, I didn't mean to sound like I was trying to pump the coin there, by the way. This is just...
Can I jump with a super quick question for Tom? Tom, do you think we'll catch the guys?
Yes, based on previous events of this type, they eventually get caught.
Wow, and actually, follow-up question, do you think we would have done, if this was done in US dollars, or would this even be possible in regular fiat currency?
If it had been done in physical cash, maybe not.
Indeed. Right. Okay. Well, nice, sharp finish to the show. Jakub, if people want to know more about what you're doing at Coinfirm, where can they find out more?
Coinfirm.com, the best way. So, yeah.
Tom, how do people find out more about what you're up to at Elliptic?
Absolutely. The website address is elliptic.co.
Thank you. And Noelle, how do people find out more about you and CoinDesk?
Well, CoinDesk.com is where you can keep up to date with all of the news that matters in the sector, and also check out our new research hub at coindesk.com/research. And you can follow me at Noelle in Madrid on Twitter, and also CoinDesk Research at CoinDesk Data.
Fantastic, and thank you for watching. If you like what you've seen, please remember to subscribe to FinTech Insider and all of our podcasts. Don't forget to leave us a review on those podcasts. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn. It makes the show better. And please do pass along the breakfast show. Follow the 11FS account and you will never, ever miss a show. If you have any suggestions or feedback, find us on social media or just search for 11FS. Thank you very, very much. Bye for now.